think he's likely to follow in Truss's footsteps. She was reopening the integrated review into the UK's defence and security that Boris Johnson conducted in 2020. And that's likely to see some of the language and policy around China toughened up.
A little later on this morning, the new leader of the Conservative Party will visit King Charles in Buckingham Palace and then head to Downing Street, where he'll be making his first speech as PM. His second leadership race has been characterised by his silence, but we can work out where he stands on the issues that most affect us from his previous campaign. Let's hear about some of them with our chief political commentator, Lucy Fisher. Morning to you, Lucy.
Morning, Yasma.
Let's start off with tax, shall we? Let's just listen, first of all, to what he said about tax.
Because I'm a Conservative like you, I want to cut taxes, and I think tax cuts can drive growth, but only if we cut the right ones. And with my plan, we will actually get the outcome we want. If we go with Liz's plan and stick with what we've done for the last 10 years, nothing's going to change.
So we did go with Liz's plan, and then it got ripped up. What is the current situation, and what might change?
Well, a lot's going to change on that front. Rishi Sunak made clear during the summer campaign that his personal preference is for lower taxes. And indeed, as Chancellor, he did come in for quite a strong degree of criticism from some quarters of his party for raising the tax burden to its highest level in 70 years. But we know from what he has said in the summer that he cannot cut taxes until the economy is in better shape. And indeed, I don't think we're going to get tax cuts, far from it. Tax rises look more likely in the medium-term fiscal outlook. We're going to hear from him and his Chancellor on October the 31st or shortly thereafter.
What kind of tax rises? I mean, I know we're speculating, but what do you think?
Well, it's hard to see where he can easily raise taxes. I think it's been suggested by those around him, his allies, yesterday, he isn't going to do the hokey cokey with the national insurance rise contribution, that rise of 1.25 percentage points that was supposed to raise £13 billion, first for the NHS and then within a few years to be diverted annually to social care. He came up with that policy. Liz Truss promised to cut it. It's now going through legislation in the Commons to be reversed. So I think the sense is he's going to stick with that reversal rather than confuse people by bringing it back again.
Goodness me, what a state we are in when it comes to that. Let's hear what he says about the NHS.
Which is why I set out a plan to tackle this issue of missed appointments. Because for too long, millions and millions of hospital and GP appointments go missed. And that's a waste, and it's not wrong, and people are abusing the system. So if we can try and change that, change behaviour, be tough on those, make sure that people cancel those appointments in advance, do you know what we've done? We've just created tons more healthcare.
How much more healthcare would that come up with? I mean, is that the biggest issue facing the NHS?
No, and in short, I think that this is a controversial proposal that we're going to see shelved. It was immediately leapt upon by NHS managers and administrators, pointing out it's just completely unfeasible and would probably cost more to implement than it would raise. But the NHS and social care is one of the knottiest issues that Rishi Sunak faces in his in-tray, sorting out the health service, ensuring it doesn't collapse with the winter crisis that's threatened this year, strikes possibly on the horizon from junior doctors and nurses. He's got a lot on his hands there. What he has said this summer is that he wants to bring up a new backlogs task force. There are, of course, now 7 million Brits waiting for hospital treatment, and he wants to recruit more doctors and nurses from overseas.
Let's talk then a slightly related issue then about immigration. Let's hear where he is on immigration.
We will continue to always be that beacon of hope for people around the world, but it must be done fairly, it must be done legally. And making the Rwanda policy work is an important part of getting a grip of this situation.
Right, so he wants the Rwanda policy to work. It's not currently working right now because of legal challenges. How will he be able to succeed on another naughty issue that many other people have failed on?
Well, it's just a very difficult issue. We are an island nation, and stopping those small boat crossings is just so difficult. So I think deterrence and trying to continue with the Rwanda policy, as you say, at the moment it's stuck in legal limbo, is going to be a really tricky challenge. Another element of immigration I'm really interested to see what he does on is via the legal UK work visas. We have huge gaps in our labour market at the moment, more than 1 million vacancies. It would make sense if he's trying to pursue a growth agenda to try and loosen that regime to allow more overseas workers to fill those vacancies. However, potentially controversial with his party. So let's see how he tries to wiggle through that one.
Now, of course, the biggest issue over the last few months was energy. Let's hear what he has to say about that.
Now, what I've been very clear about is that we're all paying far too much for our electricity at the moment for reasons that we haven't addressed, because the electricity providers get to charge us a very high price based on what's going on in the natural gas markets. That's wrong. I would change it. They've done it in lots of European countries. We're behind, and as Prime Minister, I'd fix it so that you and all the businesses can get cheaper electricity as soon as possible, because that's what our country needs.
So just explain what he means by that he would change it. They do it in other countries.
One is perhaps changing the mechanisms around pricing, more regulation around energy firms having to hedge if we see price spikes in the wholesale price of gas, as we have done in the past year or so due to Russia's activities. But another really important longer term issue he's got to grapple with is trying to boost Britain's security to make us more self-sufficient. And in some ways, he's slightly backed himself into a corner there. He said that he's up for more nuclear, more rooftop solar panels and offshore wind farms. But like Liz Truss, he suggested during the summer campaign that he wasn't keen on solar farms or onshore wind. So let's see, now he's not having to try and attract votes from a Tory membership that has very conservative views on this if he tries to shapeshift somewhat.
Now, I have to say that I've concentrated very much on the domestic issues because we have huge domestic issues right now. And I would be hard pressed to come up with a policy or a point of view that Rishi Sunak has on foreign policy. Let's look at China, which might be the biggest issue over the next 10 years. And let's hear what he had to say about that.
China was an enormous threat to our national security, and that's the lens in which we should throw it. Others, and he was very early to it. And the right approach to that is to take the powers and the protections we need to protect our country against it, something that actually you and I, Liz, have worked together on to make sure that we have legislation that stops hostile investment into this country, protects our national infrastructure.
Briefly, Lucy, how could we summarise his approach to foreign policy, if at all? Lucy, are you still there?
Well, briefly on Ukraine, I think it'll be very much continuity from Boris Johnson and Liz Truss on Ukraine, steadfast support for Kyiv and supplying military arms. On China, I think he's likely to follow in Truss's footsteps. She was reopening the integrated review into the UK's defence and security that Boris Johnson conducted in 2020, and that's likely to see some of the language and policy around China toughened up.
Okay, Lucy, thank you very much for that. That is our chief political commentator, Lucy Fisher.
Keep your thoughts coming in.